The words didn't just sting. They landed with the slow precision of something rehearsed, refined, and finally released. I can't do this anymore. If you've ever been loved but still left behind, subscribe, because this isn't just a breakup. And tell me in the comments right now, was she cruel, or was she finally honest? The sentence was quiet, but it cut through the coffee shop like someone had raised the volume on it. The morning crowd kept moving in small motions, hands reaching for sugar packets, lids snapping onto cups, shoes scraping the floor, yet somehow the air around their table went still. Ethan sat across from her with both hands wrapped around a mug of black coffee, the kind he bought because it was the cheapest thing on the menu that still let him sit there without being rushed out. Lena didn't sit. She stayed standing, shoulders squared, like if she folded into the chair she might fold into regret. I can't keep pretending love is enough, she continued, and her voice trembled slightly, betraying how much she'd been carrying before she ever spoke. Not when we both know it isn't. Not when the future still looks exactly the same. Ethan blinked as if the sentence didn't belong to them. As if she'd accidentally stepped into the wrong conversation. What are you saying? He asked low. We're fine. We've been fine. Lena shook her head and it wasn't dramatic. It was small, almost apologetic. I'm tired, she whispered. I'm tired of trying to be brave about it. I'm tired of acting like I don't care when I do. I'm 28. I'm exhausted. And I'm scared. Ethan leaned forward, the table suddenly feeling like a barrier he could break through if he just pushed hard enough. Then talk to me, he said. We can fix whatever this is. Her eyes flicked around the room for half a second, not because she wanted an audience, but because she couldn't stop noticing that life kept happening around them. A couple at the next table lowered their voices. The barista glanced over then looked away. Someone laughed too loudly near the counter, like laughter could cancel awkwardness. Lena swallowed, forcing her voice steady again. My friends are moving forward, she said. Engagements, trips, houses, babies, promotions. And I'm measuring my life in maybe next year. Ethan felt heat rise behind his eyes, not tears yet, just that hot pressure that comes before you can tell what you're feeling. You think I don't want that? He asked. You think I don't want to give you everything? I know you do. Lena's voice softened, and that softness made it worse. I know you work hard. I see it. I see you come home exhausted. I see the way you count every dollar like it's a crime to need anything. I'm not calling you lazy. Her mouth tightened like she was bracing herself for her own honesty. I'm saying I can't live like this forever. Ethan's stomach dropped. We're not living like this forever, he insisted. It's temporary. It's just right now. Lena's laugh came out thin and brief. Not cruel. Just tired. That's what you always say, she replied. It's temporary. It's just right now. But it's been right now for months. And I'm still watching you work yourself into the ground and somehow we're still stuck. Ethan's voice cracked. I'm trying. I know, she said quickly, eyes bright. I know you are. That's the problem. You're trying so hard and it's still not changing. That scares me. It makes me feel like this is all we're ever going to be. He stared at her like he could will her to sit down, to take it back, to soften into a conversation instead of a decision. Lena, he said softer now. Please. She inhaled sharply, like she was trying to keep herself from falling apart in public. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope. Ethan's heart stuttered because envelopes never meant anything good. She slid it across the table with careful fingers. Inside was the spare key to his apartment. The one she'd used so many times it had started to feel like hers too. And beneath it was a short note, written in neat, controlled handwriting, as if neatness could keep heartbreak from spilling over. I'm sorry. I can't do this anymore. Ethan stared at the key like it had betrayed him. I don't want to hurt you, Lena whispered, and the first tear finally escaped. But I'm drowning. I'm drowning in love that feels real and a future that feels impossible. And I hate myself for saying that because love should be enough. It should. But I can't keep building my life on hope. Ethan's throat tightened so hard he couldn't speak. Lena's hand hovered above his, so close her warmth felt like it was already touching him. For a second, it looked like she might take his hand and pull them back from the edge. Then she pulled away like contact would break her resolve. I'm sorry, she said again, and she sounded like she meant it more than anything she'd ever said. I really did try. She picked up her bag, adjusted the strap, and walked out without looking back. The bell over the door chimed when it closed, bright and cheerful in a way that felt obscene. Ethan sat there, still holding his coffee, though it had gone cold. He became painfully aware of the silence around him, the subtle shift of bodies, The whispers that started once people decided the moment was over. Someone muttered something about cold and ungrateful. Someone else said, she's just practical. Ethan didn't blame her. Not fully. Because she wasn't wrong about the facts. He did work long hours. He did live in a studio apartment with a radiator that barely functioned. He did count every expense and avoid every extra. He did look like a man with no future. What Lena didn't know, what nobody knew, was why. Ethan Cole wasn't only Ethan Cole. He was Ethan Cole Sterling. The grandson of Walter Cole, founder of Sterling Consolidated. The name that quietly owned factories and shipping lanes and supply chains most people never thought about. Old money that didn't need to boast because it didn't need approval. Ethan had been hiding it on purpose. Not as a prank. Not as a game. As a desperate, stubborn attempt to find something real in a world that had trained him to doubt everything. 6 months earlier, Ethan's life had been a different planet. There were nights in a mansion so still you could hear the art on the walls hanging in silence. There were mornings when he ate breakfast in a dining room larger than his current apartment, across from parents who spoke about companies the way other families spoke about weather. He didn't hate money. Not exactly. He hated what it did to people. The way strangers leaned in when they learned his last name. The way friends suddenly became available, suddenly became generous, suddenly became loyal. The way girlfriends looked at him like a finish line. Ethan had spent his 20s watching affection turn into negotiation. It started small. A casual, you should invest in my friend's idea. A loan for rent that was never repaid. A temporary situation that lasted until he realized he wasn't being loved. He was being managed. He told himself he was paranoid. He told himself it was normal. Then he met Camille, polished and connected, the kind of woman who spoke in calm sentences and never raised her voice. She worked in the art world. She wore elegance like it was effortless. She said she didn't care about wealth. Ethan believed her because he needed to believe someone. 18 months later, he overheard her laughing into her phone in a hallway where she thought nobody could hear. Just act interested in his boring hobbies and he'll buy you anything, she said, amused. And if he proposes, I'm not wearing anything under 6 figures. Ethan stood there frozen, not because of the insult but because of how casual she sounded. Like love was a strategy. That night he ended it. And later, alone in a room that cost more than most people would earn in a decade, Ethan stared at his reflection and realized something terrifying. He didn't know who he was without money orbiting him like a planet. So he made a decision his family called insane. He didn't want to disappear. He wanted to become invisible. To be just Ethan. No name recognition. No perks. No special access. No dollar signs in anyone's eyes. His father called it childish. His mother called it a phase. His sister called it the richest identity crisis ever. Ethan didn't argue. He didn't explain. He didn't ask for approval. He simply left. He found a studio apartment in Brooklyn that smelled faintly of old paint and radiator dust. He enrolled quietly in community college to finish the degree he'd abandoned. And he got a warehouse job through a temp agency that didn't ask questions about the hands that had never been forced to do work like that before. The first week nearly broke him. He came home with shoulders on fire and hands raw. He fell asleep with muscles twitching. He woke up in pain he'd never earned before. He learned quickly how humiliating it was to be tired and still have to cook because ordering food was too expensive. How humiliating it was to stare at your bank app and do math just to breathe. But something else happened too. People didn't care who he was. They cared whether he showed up. They cared whether he did his job. They cared whether he helped when someone needed a hand. At the warehouse, respect wasn't inherited. It wasn't purchased. It was earned. And for the first time in his life that felt like oxygen. Then one Tuesday morning he walked into that coffee shop. He was there for 2 reasons. It was warm and he could sit without being bothered. He brought a used textbook for his class and nursed the cheapest coffee slowly. Across the room, a woman at a table swore under her breath as her laptop froze. It wasn't a cute swear. It was a real, frustrated swear that made 2 people glance over. Ethan couldn't help laughing. She looked up, annoyed. Then embarrassed. Then she laughed too, like she couldn't help it. Ethan asked if she wanted help. That was how he met Lena Hart. Lena was smart and driven and funny when she forgot to be careful. She worked in marketing. She had her own apartment. She had goals that weren't about status, at least not at first. She didn't ask about his family. She didn't ask what he really did. She asked what he thought about books, about music, about why people did the things they did. She liked the way he listened. He liked the way she spoke with her whole face. When he asked for her number, she said yes with a smile that made him feel like he'd won something that mattered. For months it felt real. They didn't do expensive dates because they couldn't. So they did honest dates. Walks in parks. Museum-free days. Cheap diners. Movie nights in her apartment with popcorn made on the stove because it was cheaper than buying the microwave kind. Sometimes, Lena paid for things without making a speech about it. She'd toss her card down and say, "It's fine, you got last time," even when Ethan knew he hadn't. That mattered more than she understood. Ethan started to relax. He started to believe that what he'd been searching for actually existed. Then slowly the world began whispering into Lena's ear. It started with little things. A friend's engagement ring flashed across a table at brunch. A coworker's vacation photos filled her phone. A college friend bought a home and posted the keys like a trophy. And Ethan noticed Lena's smile tighten during those conversations. He noticed the way she'd go quiet after hanging out with friends who spoke about money like it was air. He noticed the questions that crept into their evenings. "What do you want to do long term?" she'd ask casual. "Have you thought about applying for something else? Something with upward movement?" He'd answer carefully. He'd talk about finishing school, about growth, about stepping stones, about plans. But he never told her the plan that existed behind all those plans. That this life was temporary by design. That he had money generating more in a month than most people earned in a year. That he was choosing to struggle. He didn't tell her because he didn't trust the world. And because, if he was honest, he didn't trust himself. He told himself he was protecting the relationship. But what he was really doing was testing it. And tests, no matter how quiet, have a way of breaking what they're meant to measure. The pressure built in Lena like water behind a dam. She tried to be patient. She tried to be brave. She tried to tell herself love was enough. Then one morning in a coffee shop, it finally spilled over. And Ethan walked out into a gray Brooklyn morning with rent due, a sore back, a broken radiator, and a heartbreak that felt like confirmation of everything he'd feared. He checked his wallet. A few bills. Enough for a subway ride. Enough for groceries if he stretched it. Definitely not enough for pride. He had a shift at the warehouse in 3 hours. Rent was due in 5 days. And now he had it alone. The warehouse didn't look like a place where someone's life could change. It was concrete and steel and noise, the kind of building people drove past without noticing. Inside, conveyor belts ran like endless rivers. Scanners beeped. Pallets slammed down. Workers moved with the tired rhythm of people who had done this 1,000 times. Ethan clocked in, slid on his gloves, and tried to let his body do what it knew how to do. His supervisor, Big Mike, spotted him immediately. Big Mike was the kind of man who didn't waste words or pretend to care when he didn't. Thick shoulders. A voice that carried. Eyes that saw more than people wanted. Big Mike lifted one brow. "Your face looks like a funeral," he said. Ethan exhaled. Got dumped. Big Mike didn't ask who. Didn't ask why. He handed Ethan a clipboard and a box cutter like heartbreak could be solved by productivity. "Best cure is work," he said. "Loading dock 3 needs clearing. Take Javi and Min." Ethan nodded and moved. The hours blurred into motion, lifting, stacking, scanning, hauling. His muscles burned and his back ached, and for a while that pain was a mercy because it made the pain in his chest feel less sharp. Javi talked constantly, filling silence with sports takes and jokes and complaints about rent like it was a second job. Min was quieter, but when he spoke it was usually something dry and perfectly timed, enough to make even the most exhausted people laugh. Ethan liked them. That was the strange part. These were people who had no reason to pretend with him. No reason to flatter him. No reason to maneuver. They just existed beside him. And when Lena left, it wasn't his money he missed first. It was the feeling that someone saw him. During lunch, sitting on the edge of the loading dock with sandwiches wrapped in foil, Javi finally asked the question Ethan had been dreading. "So what happened?" he said, chewing. "The marketing girl. The one you brought around that one time." Ethan's stomach tightened. He kept his tone light because if he didn't, he might shatter. "She decided she wanted someone with better prospects," he said. "Can't really blame her." Min snorted. "That's cold." "It's not cold," Javi argued. "It's practical. People want stability. They want kids, schools, a house. They want to breathe without worrying about bills." Min shook his head. "Love is supposed to mean something." Javi shrugged. "Love doesn't pay rent." Ethan listened to them debate like they were arguing about weather, grateful neither expected him to contribute. Because the truth was complicated in a way he couldn't explain without revealing everything. Lena hadn't left him because he was cruel. She left him because she thought he had no road forward. And Ethan had built that roadblock himself. At the end of the shift, Ethan stepped outside and felt winter in the air, sharp, early, threatening. He was already thinking about how he'd fix the radiator, or how he'd buy a space heater, or how he'd have to choose between comfort and food again. He was so lost in thought he almost walked past the black town car parked near the warehouse entrance. Almost. But the man beside it didn't belong there. Not in Red Hook. Not outside a shipping warehouse. He wore a suit that looked expensive without trying, and his posture was the kind that came from decades of standing in rooms where people listened when you spoke. Ethan's stomach dropped. Mr. Keene. His family's attorney. The boundary between Ethan's two lives, the boundary he'd fought to protect, split like cracked glass. "What are you doing here?" Ethan asked. Mr. Keene's expression was careful, professional. But there was something underneath it, a seriousness that made Ethan's throat go dry. "I'm sorry to intrude," he said. "But your family insisted this couldn't wait." Ethan's first thought wasn't anger. It was fear. "Is my mother okay?" he asked. "Is my father?" "They're fine," Mr. Keene assured him quickly. "Physically. But there's been a death." Ethan froze. "Your grandfather," Mr. Keene continued. "Walter Cole passed away 3 days ago." The words took a moment to land, like Ethan's brain refused to accept them until it had no choice. "When?" he managed. 3 days ago, Mr. Keene repeated. "The service is tomorrow. But before that, there will be a will reading. And your presence is required." "Required?" Ethan echoed. Mr. Keene nodded once. "Your grandfather wrote it that way." Ethan swallowed hard. He wasn't close to Walter in the way grandsons were supposed to be close to grandfathers. Walter was distant. Sure. More empire than emotion. Ethan had spent most of his life feeling like Walter saw him as an extension of a legacy, not as a person. So why would his presence be required? Ethan looked back at the warehouse, at the life he'd been trying to live. Then at the town car, at the world he'd tried to escape. He spoke quietly. "I can't show up looking like this." Mr. Keene opened the back door slightly, revealing a garment bag. "I brought something appropriate," he said. "And Ethan, I hope you don't mind me speaking plainly. Whatever you've been doing these last months, it ends tomorrow. Your grandfather's will is going to change everything." Ethan's jaw tightened. He knew. Mr. Keene didn't answer immediately. That pause was its own confession. "He had me keep an eye on you," Mr. Keene said finally. "Not to control you. To understand you. He was interested. More than he let on." The ride to Ethan's apartment was quiet in the way quiet becomes loud. Ethan watched Brooklyn slide past the window and felt like he was watching a life he could never return to. In his studio apartment, the suit in the garment bag looked like an intruder. It was tailored so precisely it felt like it had been waiting for him to stop pretending. He changed mechanically. When he looked in the mirror, the air looked back. Not Ethan who lifted boxes. Ethan who carried a name. He sent one text to Big Mike. "Family emergency. Need a few days." The response came almost immediately. "Take what you need. Sorry for your loss." That small kindness hit Ethan harder than expected. Because it was real. No calculation. No benefit. Just a human being acknowledging grief. The drive to the estate took 90 minutes. Brooklyn turned into Manhattan, then into suburbs, then into manicured quiet. Gates. Long driveways. Trees planted in perfect lines like nature had been trained to behave. The estate was 10 acres of controlled beauty surrounding a mansion that had been in the family for generations. Ethan had grown up here. He had run through these halls as a child and hated them as a teenager and tried to escape them as an adult. Now it felt like stepping into a museum of himself. His mother waited in the foyer. Lena Cole looked the same as she always did, elegant in that effortless way wealth gave people, as if time had to ask permission before it touched her. She pulled Ethan into an embrace that was warm and reproachful at once. 6 months, she whispered. 6 months without a proper conversation. "I'm sorry," Ethan said, and his voice sounded smaller in this house. "You've lost weight," she murmured, pulling back just enough to study him. "You look tired." "I am tired," Ethan admitted. His father appeared from the study with a glass of scotch in his hand. Graham Cole was silver-haired and commanding, the kind of man who didn't need to raise his voice to make people feel it. "The runaway returns," he said dry. Ethan opened his mouth to speak. His father lifted a hand. "Tomorrow," he said. "We'll talk tomorrow. Tonight you sleep. Because whatever Walter decided, we'll all have to live with it." Ethan's sister, Nadia, appeared on the stairs. She looked him up and down and rolled her eyes like she didn't know whether to hug him or insult him first. "You look like you got hit by a truck," she said. Ethan didn't answer fast enough, and Nadia's expression softened despite herself. "Oh," she said quietly. "It's that kind of day." Ethan tried to smile and failed. Nadia stepped down and hugged him, quick and tight. "I missed you, idiot," she whispered. Then she pulled back and added, because she couldn't help herself, "You're going to smell like cardboard forever." Ethan almost laughed. Almost. That night, in his old room, Ethan stared at the ceiling and felt his two lives pressing against each other. In Brooklyn, heartbreak had made him feel small. In this house, grief made him feel trapped. He fell asleep with the suit jacket draped over a chair like a warning. Morning arrived bright through windows he'd forgotten could be that large. Downstairs, the dining room filled with family. His uncle. His aunt. Cousins he'd avoided. People who hugged too politely and looked at him too carefully. The attorney arrived on time, set his briefcase down and began reading. Properties. Art. Personal effects. Expected. Then his voice changed slightly, not louder, just sharper like a blade turning. Regarding Sterling Consolidated, he said, Walter Cole has chosen to leave controlling interest not to his children, but to his grandson. The air in the room snapped. Ethan's breath stopped. His uncle stood up so fast his chair scraped loudly against the floor. "That's ridiculous," he snapped. "He hasn't even been involved. He's been playing broke in Brooklyn like it's a game." Ethan felt everyone's eyes turn to him like searchlights. The attorney lifted a hand. "Come." Unmoved. "I assure you," he said, "it is legitimate." And Walter Cole left a letter explaining his reasoning. An envelope slid across the table toward Ethan. His hands shook when he picked it up. The handwriting inside was unmistakable. Walter's. Older. Rougher. Still sharp. Ethan read it once. Then again. Walter wrote that he knew. He knew about the warehouse. He knew about Brooklyn. He knew Ethan had been trying to find out if anyone could love him without the money. Walter wrote that he had done the same thing once. Before anyone knew his name. That's how he'd known Ethan's grandmother was real. Ethan's throat tightened and he hated that it did. Because grief wasn't something Walter had ever encouraged. Walter wrote that Ethan hadn't found it yet. Maybe he never would. But the fact that Ethan was searching, the fact that he'd walked away from comfort to chase truth, proved to Walter that Ethan was the only one in the family who understood what mattered. Walter wrote one final line that felt less like a gift and more like a challenge. "Don't waste this." The attorney set the letter down and clarified the reality with a number large enough to bend the room around it. A multi-billion controlling stake. Control. Power. Responsibility. Ethan's family erupted. Arguments. Accusations. Demands to see documents. Ethan sat still, staring at the paper because his mind wasn't in the room. His mind was in a coffee shop. An envelope sliding across a table. A key. A bell. And Lena saying she couldn't build a life on hope. He hadn't even processed his grandfather's death yet, and the universe had already decided to test him again. The funeral passed in a blur. Condolences. Eulogies. The casket lowered into the ground. The finality of dirt settling over a life that had shaped so many others. Afterward, Ethan stepped away into the garden, needing air, needing something that didn't smell like polished grief. Nadia found him with 2 glasses of wine and handed him one. "This is insane," she said. Ethan let out a breath that sounded like it had been trapped for weeks. "This morning," he said quietly, "I was a warehouse worker who got dumped." Nadia's mouth tightened. "And now you're the guy everyone's going to pretend they care about." Ethan almost laughed. "Almost." Nadia watched him for a moment. "Are you going to tell her?" she asked. Ethan didn't pretend not to know who her meant. "I don't even know what I'd say," he admitted. Nadia tilted her head. "You could do the dramatic thing. Walk into her office with the headlines. Let her see what she walked away from." The thought had been sitting in Ethan's mind like a temptation. It would be easy. It would be satisfying in a petty way he didn't want to admit. Ethan stared out at the estate grounds and shook his head slightly. "If I do that," he said, "then I'm proving her point. That the only reason I matter is what I can provide." Nadia sipped her wine. "So what are you going to do?" Ethan didn't answer because his phone buzzed in his pocket. He turned it on briefly just to check for missed calls. Messages stacked across the screen, most from family he'd ignored. Then there were the ones that mattered. From Lena. "I just saw the news. Please. We need to talk. I can't believe you didn't tell me. I made a terrible mistake. Just 5 minutes, please." Nadia saw the screen and let out a low whistle. That was fast. "She didn't say she wants to get back together," Ethan murmured, though even he could hear how weak that sounded. Nadia's eyes narrowed. Ethan. Ethan stared at the messages until the words blurred. Then he turned off the phone. "I'm not ready," he said. Nadia didn't argue. She just nodded slowly like she understood more than she wanted to. The next days were meetings and documents in boardrooms that smelled like expensive coffee and controlled power. There were lawyers explaining structures and advisors outlining consequences and accountants talking about assets the way warehouse workers talked about pallets. Just inventory, just movement, just numbers. Ethan sat through it and felt detached, like he was watching someone else's life on a screen. His father helped, despite the obvious sting of being passed over. "Your grandfather made his choice," his father said, voice tight. "I don't agree with it, but I respect it. And I'm not letting you destroy what we built just because you're angry at the world." Ethan didn't argue because he wasn't angry at the world anymore. He was afraid of himself. Afraid of what money turned people into. Afraid of becoming the very thing he'd run from. At his first board meeting as controlling heir, the questions came sharp and fast, like darts thrown by people who wanted to see if he'd flinch. They asked about strategy, margins, supply chain risks, European operations, expansion plans. Ethan answered as best he could, leaning on the business knowledge he'd absorbed his whole life even when he tried not to. He was competent. Not brilliant. Not yet. And competence wasn't what they wanted. They wanted weakness. They wanted proof the heir was a mistake. Then an older director, Ms. Park, asked the question everyone really wanted answered. "Why do you think Walter Cole left this company to you?" she asked, "instead of to the men with decades more experience?" The room went silent. Ethan thought about Walter's letter. About the warehouse. About counting dollars. About watching people do math just to survive. "I think," Ethan said slowly, "my grandfather believed experience isn't the same as wisdom." He paused. He wanted someone who remembered that behind every decision are real people. People who depend on these jobs. People who can lose everything because of a line on a spreadsheet. Ms. Park's expression stayed neutral. "That sounds idealistic." Ethan didn't flinch. "I spent 6 months doing work that most people in this room would call beneath them," he said. "I lived paycheck to paycheck. I worried about rent. I chose between groceries and basic comfort. That isn't idealism. That's reality. And if I'm going to run this company, I'm not going to pretend reality doesn't exist." The silence after that felt different. Not approval. Not yet. But attention. After the meeting, Miss Park caught him in the hallway. "That was either brave or stupid," she said. Ethan exhaled. "Why can't it be both?" She almost smiled. "Just don't let it become performance," she warned. "Don't become the billionaire who tells warehouse stories while cutting warehouse jobs. If you're going to claim that experience means something, prove it when it costs you." That sentence stuck to Ethan's ribs. Prove it when it costs you. Because the temptation of money wasn't just luxury. It was convenience. It was the ability to say yes without thinking. And the danger of money wasn't greed. It was numbness. That week, the media found the story. It always did. The headlines spread like wildfire. "Billionaire heir secretly works warehouse job in Brooklyn." People didn't know Ethan had done it to find truth. They called it an experiment. A stunt. A brand move. Business commentators debated whether it was inspiring or insulting. Online, strangers argued about his motives like they knew his heart. And every time Ethan saw those clips, he felt something sour in his stomach. Because the world was turning his pain into content. Then the warehouse found out. Not from Ethan. From the news. Big Mike called him. Not angry. Just blunt. "So this is what you are," Big Mike said. Ethan exhaled, expecting disappointment, maybe resentment. "I didn't want anyone to treat me different," Ethan said. Big Mike was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You don't get to choose how people treat you. You only get to choose what you do with what you got." Ethan swallowed. "I never meant to disrespect anyone." "I know," Big Mike replied. "But listen. The guys are talking. Some are proud. Some are mad. Some think you played them." Ethan's throat tightened. "Did I?" Big Mike's voice stayed steady. "That depends on what you do next." That sentence haunted Ethan more than the boardroom questions. Because Big Mike wasn't impressed by money. He was measuring character. And Ethan needed to prove he wasn't just someone who borrowed struggle like a costume. He turned his phone back on that night. Lena's messages were still there, more desperate now, each one asking for a conversation, an explanation, a chance. Ethan stared at them. Part of him wanted to ignore her forever. Part of him wanted revenge. And part of him, the part that had loved her, wanted closure. He didn't trust himself to choose the right reason. So he called Nadia. "I'm thinking of meeting her," he admitted. Nadia was quiet, then said, "Why?" "I don't know," Ethan confessed. "Because I need to know if she was real." Nadia sighed. "She was real. She also made a choice." "And I made choices too," Ethan said. "That's true," Nadia replied. "You tested her." Ethan closed his eyes. "I didn't mean to." Nadia's voice softened. "Meaning doesn't change impact. If you meet her, don't go to win. Go to understand. And if you feel even 1 second that you're using your money as a weapon, leave." Ethan swallowed hard. "Okay." The next morning he texted Lena. "Coffee. Tomorrow. Same place." Her response came instantly. "Thank you. I'll be there." That night Ethan didn't sleep much. He stared at the ceiling and replayed every moment of their relationship. The laughs. The little arguments. The nights they cooked together. The way she used to rest her head on his shoulder when she was tired. He also replayed the moments he ignored. The way she sometimes hesitated when she introduced him. The way she sometimes went quiet when her friends talked about money. The way she sometimes asked about next steps, like she was watching a clock. He had told himself those were normal pressures. But maybe they were warnings. Or maybe they were just human. People weren't villains. They were messy. He'd learned that at the warehouse. He'd learn it again tomorrow. The coffee shop looked the same. And Ethan felt like a stranger walking in. He wore a suit now. Not flashy. Just undeniable. The kind of clothing that changed how people looked at you even when they didn't know your name. Lena was already there at their table. She stood so quickly her chair scraped the floor. "Ethan," she said softly. "Thank you for coming." He sat without smiling, without glaring. Neutral because anything else would crack him open. "You wanted to talk," he said. "So talk." Lena inhaled shakily. "I made a mistake," she began. "I was scared and selfish and I let other people's lives get in my head. I felt like I was falling behind. I didn't even realize how much pressure I was carrying until I walked out of here and felt sick." Her eyes filled. "And when I saw the news," she continued quickly, "I panicked. Not because of the money. Because I realized I lost you, and I didn't even fight." Ethan didn't react. He asked the one question he needed answered. "When did you find out?" Lena blinked. "Find out what?" "Who I am," Ethan said quietly. "When did you find out about the money?" Lena's face colored slightly. "The day after," she admitted. "It was everywhere." Ethan nodded once. "And that's when you started texting." Lena's voice rose with emotion. "Ethan, no, I wanted to reach out immediately. I was embarrassed. I didn't think you'd want to hear from me. I thought I was giving you space." Ethan's gaze didn't move. "Convenient timing," he said softly. Lena's eyes flashed, hurt mixing with anger. "And you weren't convenient?" she shot back, voice shaking. "You lied to me, Ethan." He didn't deny it. "You let me believe you were struggling," she said, words spilling now. "You let me budget and plan and sacrifice with you. You let me worry about you, about us, while you were sitting on all that. You tested me. You created a fake life and put me in it to see if I'd love you anyway." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I never lied to your face," he started. "You lied by omission," Lena snapped, tears falling. "You built a whole fiction and called it honesty because you didn't say the words out loud. You didn't trust me enough to tell me the truth, but you expected me to choose you without fear." The words hit because they were true. Ethan's voice dropped. "I didn't want to be loved for my money. And I didn't want to drown," Lena whispered back. "We were both scared. We were both trying to protect ourselves. We both failed." Silence sat between them like a third person. Lena's voice softened again, rawer now. "I did love you," she said. "I love the way you listened. I loved the way you made me feel safe emotionally even when everything else felt unstable. I loved you, Ethan." Ethan's throat tightened. "And that's what kills me," Lena continued. "Because I left anyway. I left a man I loved because I was afraid of the future." She reached across the table and her hand hovered near his. "I'm not asking you to forgive me instantly," she whispered. "I'm not even asking you to take me back today. I'm asking you to give me a chance to prove I can be the woman I should have been in that moment." Ethan stared at her hand. The warmth, the familiarity, the temptation. And the part of him that wanted this to be fixable rose like a wave. But he remembered the envelope. The key. The way she'd pulled back from touching him like he was already gone. He also remembered what Big Mike had said. That what mattered was what you did next. Ethan didn't want to be the man who could be bought back by apologies once money was in the room. He also didn't want to be the man who punished people forever for being human. So he chose the only thing he could trust. Honesty. I don't trust us, Ethan said quietly. Lena's face crumpled. How do I prove it? She whispered. Ethan swallowed hard. I don't know. He pulled his hand away gently. I believe you cared about me, he said. But caring isn't the same as choosing. And when it mattered, you didn't choose me. Lena's tears fell freely. So that's it, she whispered. We're done? Ethan stood, leaving cash on the table. Not because you're evil, he said softly. And not because I'm better than you. But because trust doesn't come back just because the circumstances change. He paused, voice low. I hope you find the life you're chasing, he said. I really do. But I can't build a future with someone I'll always wonder about. Lena looked up at him, eyes red. I really did love you, she whispered. Not the money. You. Ethan nodded once. I believe you, he said. But love isn't enough if fear is louder. Then he walked out. The bell chimed again. Bright. Cheerful. But this time it didn't feel obscene. It felt like closure. Outside, Ethan breathed cold air and felt a strange relief mixed with grief. Because endings were easier than uncertainty. But life didn't let him rest. That afternoon, a merger proposal landed on the table. Ravenport Manufacturing. Market share. Expansion. Increased margins. And beneath the polished language was the line that mattered. Operational efficiencies. 1,200 layoffs. 1,200 lives rearranged so shareholders could smile. Ethan stared at the number and didn't see spreadsheets. He saw Javi talking about his kids. He saw Min's quiet worry about his parents. He saw Big Mike's tired eyes. He saw the warehouse floor. He saw what efficiency looked like when you were the one being cut. In the board meeting, when everyone expected him to nod, Ethan said calmly, no. The room froze. One director leaned forward. With respect, that's not how business works. Ethan held their gaze. Then we'll build a business that works differently, he said. Arguments exploded. Warnings. Predictions. Complaints about shareholder confidence. Ethan didn't shout. He simply refused. He tabled the merger until there was a plan that didn't involve destroying 1,200 livelihoods. Afterward, Miss Park cornered him again. That was the stupidest brave thing you could have done, she said. Ethan exhaled. I know. You just made your job harder, she continued. But you also proved you weren't performing. You used your power the way you said you would. She paused, then added quietly, your grandfather would have approved. That night, Ethan received a call from his father. I heard about Ravenport, his father said. Ethan braced for anger. Instead, his father's voice was low, almost tired. Walter did something like that in the 80s, his father admitted. Turned down a deal that would have doubled the company because it would have destroyed a town. I thought he was insane. I thought business was numbers. Ethan's father exhaled. I learned later business is people. There was a silence. Then his father said something Ethan didn't expect. He might have been right to choose you. That sentence didn't feel like praise. It felt like a door cracking open. Over the next weeks, the world pushed back. Shareholders complained. Articles questioned his competence. A commentator called him the heir with a conscience and no spine. And then the real danger appeared. Not loud. Not obvious. Quiet. Internal. Someone leaked a story that made Ethan look like a fraud. It wasn't about Brooklyn. That story had already been chewed up. This was different. This leak framed Ethan's 6 months as poverty tourism, calling it insulting. It implied he used workers as props to craft an image. The story spread fast because outrage always spreads fast. At the warehouse, the mood shifted. Ethan showed up one evening after work, not in a suit, just in plain clothes because he needed to see Big Mike. He found Big Mike outside near the loading area. Big Mike looked him up and down. You came back, Big Mike said. Ethan nodded. I needed to. Big Mike's expression stayed unreadable. You seeing what they're saying about you? I am, Ethan said quietly. And? Ethan swallowed. And I deserve some of it. Big Mike's brow lifted. Ethan continued, voice careful. Not because I did it as a stunt. I didn't. But because I never asked what it would feel like from your side. What it would look like if people found out and turned it into a joke. Big Mike was quiet. Ethan stared at the pavement. I didn't want anybody to treat me different. I wanted to be real. Big Mike finally spoke. Real doesn't mean hidden. Real means accountable. Ethan nodded slowly. Then hold me accountable. Big Mike stared at him a long moment. Then he said, you want to prove you're not using workers as props? Don't give speeches. Do something that costs you. Ethan's chest tightened. Like what? Big Mike shrugged. Talk is cheap. Benefits ain't. Training programs ain't. Wages ain't. Ethan nodded. Because the real test wasn't Ravenport. The real test was whether Ethan would keep choosing people even when it wasn't convenient. So he did. He raised the minimum wage across Sterling's warehouse and manufacturing divisions. He implemented profit sharing, small at first, then larger. He created a worker training program with real pathways to move up. And he didn't announce it with a flashy press release. He let it leak quietly through workers who felt it. The board fought him. They said he was setting a dangerous precedent. They said it would cut margins. Ethan listened, then did it anyway. Because if his Brooklyn life meant anything, it had to mean something tangible. Months later, Sterling's numbers started doing something nobody predicted. Turnover dropped. Productivity rose. Recruiting became easier. People wanted to work there. Not because it was perfect, but because it felt fair. The media noticed again. This time the tone shifted. They couldn't call it a stunt if it kept happening. They couldn't call it performance if the sacrifices were real. And Ethan, who'd spent 6 months trying to prove he could be loved without money, learned something more valuable. Money was a tool. And the real test wasn't whether someone would love him when he was broke. The real test was who he would become when he was finally free to choose. One evening his phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Hey, it's Javi. Big Mike gave me your contact. Heard what you did about the wages. My cousin works at Ravenport. You probably saved his job. Respect. If you ever want a beer and no suits, hit me up." Ethan stared at the screen then smiled. He typed back, "Beer sounds perfect. Don't let me forget what real work feels like." Later that night another message came in. From Lena. Just one. No begging. No bargaining. No rewrite of history. "I won't contact you again. I'm sorry for how I left. I hope you become the man you're trying to be." Ethan read it twice then set the phone down. He felt relief. He felt sadness. He felt the strange peace of knowing something was finished. Because the story everyone expected, the dramatic revenge, the triumphant reveal, the girl realizing what she lost, wasn't the real story. The real story was what happened after. After the heartbreak. After the inheritance. After the temptation to use wealth like a weapon. Ethan didn't become the billionaire who posted charity for applause. He became something quieter. A man who built systems that didn't crush people. A man who remembered what it felt like to count dollars. A man who refused to pretend that efficiency was neutral. A year after his grandfather died, Ethan stood in front of a crowd at the opening of a worker development center funded by Sterling. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't a gala. It was a building designed to change people's lives slowly and steadily. In the crowd were warehouse workers. Min stood in a suit that looked borrowed, uncomfortable but proud. Javi stood with his kids, beaming like he couldn't believe he belonged in the same room as this moment. Big Mike stood near the back, arms crossed as if to say he wasn't sentimental, even though his eyes told a different story. Ethan stepped up to the mic and looked out at them. For a second he thought about telling the dramatic version. The version where he got dumped and then became a billionaire and showed everyone. The version people would clip for TikTok. Instead he told the truth. "I thought my biggest problem was money," Ethan said, voice calm. "I thought if I removed it from my life I could find out who people really were. And I did learn things. I learned how hard people work. I learned how easy it is to get stuck. I learned what it feels like to worry about rent." He paused. "But the biggest thing I learned was this: it's not enough to understand struggle. You have to respect it. And if you ever gain power, you have to decide whether you're going to use it to squeeze people, or build them." He looked toward the back of the room where Big Mike stood. "This place exists because people deserve opportunity without begging for it," Ethan continued. "Talent is everywhere. But access isn't. That's what we're changing." The applause wasn't thunderous. It was real. It was the sound of people clapping because they felt seen. Afterward, Big Mike approached him with a paper cup of punch like it was the only kind of celebration he trusted. "You did good," Big Mike said. Ethan exhaled. "I'm trying." Big Mike nodded once. "Keep trying. Power makes people lazy." Ethan almost laughed. "You're not going to let me get comfortable, are you?" Big Mike's mouth twitched. "Comfort is where character goes to die." Ethan looked around the center. Around the workers. Around the families. Around the real people behind the numbers. And he realized something. Lena dumping him for being broke didn't ruin his life. It revealed it. It showed him exactly what he'd been chasing, and what he still needed to fix inside himself. Because Lena wasn't the villain. She was human. She let fear win. And Ethan, if he was honest, had also let fear win. He'd feared being used so much that he used deception. He'd feared fake love so much that he tested real love until it cracked. They both failed each other. And maybe that failure was the lesson. Love wasn't just emotion. It was choice. It was courage. It was two people deciding to stand in the same storm. Lena hadn't been able to do that. Ethan hadn't been honest enough to let her try without pressure. That was the truth. And the truth didn't make a perfect ending. It made a real one. That night, Ethan stood on a balcony overlooking the city lights. Somewhere behind him was the man in a cheap jacket holding cold coffee while a woman walked out of a cafe. Somewhere ahead was a future nobody could predict. And right now, in the quiet between heartbreak and legacy, there was just Ethan. Not rich. Not poor. Just a man trying to be better than he was yesterday. Trying to build something that mattered. And maybe someday when he'd learned how to trust without testing and love without fear, he'd find someone who could choose him fully. Not the name. Not the money. Just the man. But that was a story for another day. For now he had work to do.